They have transfer gates down here. Shut them down. More gates, up ahead. This isn't an invasion. The Vex are returning home. Something is calling them back to the Black Garden.
Jackson Crawford. This is the second in my ranch porch series of me just sitting out on the front porch and talking about things either that I want to talk about or that people tend to ask me about that are unrelated to Old Norse or that involve personal opinions, so they don't really belong in the main scheduled series of videos that I do. So, one topic that I get asked about very, very much in a lot of different guises is Aosatru, to use the modern Icelandic pronunciation of that word, which seems to be most common among practitioners of the religion. For those that might not know, Aosatru is belief in the Norse gods. It is what you could call the Norse religion. A lot of different guises is Aosatru, to use the modern Icelandic pronunciation of that word, which seems to be most common among practitioners of the religion. For those that might not know, Aosatru is belief in the Norse gods. It is what you could call the Norse religion. True in Icelandic or in Old Norse means faith, and Alsa in modern Icelandic would be pronounced Olsa. In Old Norse is the genitive plural of the name of the most powerful group of Norse gods, the Aesir in modern Icelandic, Asir in Old Norse. So it is literally just faith in the Aesir, faith in the Norse gods. And this is a term that is favored by many practitioners of the Norse religion today. Others prefer other terms like heathenism. Another one that I see sometimes is fornsíðr, which is ancient way. In fact, none of these terms are preserved for the Old Norse religion in Old Norse. Aosatru is a modern formulation, although Olsathru would be a good Old Norse word that would work as one, but it's not preserved as such. In Old Norse, whenever the religion is referred to as a thing, it is referred to as heathenism, heatheny, and someone who practices it is heathen. But keep in mind that it is only referred to as a body of belief when it is in some way contrasted with Christianity. In a pre-Christian context, there's actually no particular word or phrase that occurs to describe the religion. Probably because it was just part of people's normal daily practices in life. You don't need a name for that. You know, I don't have a name to use what's probably a pretty good example for my particular practice of waking up at a particular time, sitting on the porch at a particular time, anything like that. And so they probably didn't have a name for the religion per se before they needed one, or Christians needed one to contrast it with this other religion. Alright, so I get a lot of different questions about this. Am I a practitioner of Aosatru? If I am not, why am I not? Why don't I talk about it more? What do I think about some particular person's views on it or some particular person's practices about it? People particularly want me to comment on some other YouTube personalities, which I'm not very inclined to do. So anyway, as I've stated before in several different videos, I do not practice Aosatru myself. And this surprises some people, which I think is interesting in and of itself. There's this notion that if you're interested in something, you must sort of be it. But I have never claimed to be, nor pretended to be, nor presented myself as a Viking, as someone who is Norse in identity or even in heritage, right? My last name is Crawford. I have no known Scandinavian heritage. I won't say that I was never tempted by Aosatru, especially in late high school, early college, when my linguistics interests were also bringing me to read a lot of Old Norse literature, particularly Havin and other poems of the Poetic Edda. I found a lot of appeal in the cynical, skeptical worldview of Havin, which I would say I still agree with 100%. And of course in the sense of wonder and mystery that there is in this body of mythology. In one interview I said that it was like we were just half seeing a ship, or maybe some rocks through the North Sea mist, and we know there's something else out there, but who knows what heights of mountains are there. But we have so little preserved in the poetic and prose Edda and some sagas. We know there was so much more, and that very mystery, I think, is a big draw to Ásatru and to the broader interest in Norse mythology. But I do not have a literal belief or faith in the Norse gods. That does not mean that I have any issue with people that do. I am not an evangelist by nature. I am very private about my religious and political beliefs. I have them. They are strong. But I don't feel the need to make other people agree with me about them. I feel like it's an unfortunate preoccupation of our times that, and you know, the first time I noticed this was back in what I'll call the old Facebook, back when Facebook was just college students. There was a little box that said political views, and the little box that said religious views, and it was one of the first things people would see when they looked at your profile. And I thought, what a shame, really. When I first meet someone, political views or religious views are some of the last things that I want to come up. They don't influence much about who my friends are. I mean, consider, right? Consider where I'm from. I'm from rural Colorado, Wyoming. And then I worked at goddamn Berkeley, right? You know, I know people from every possible side of the spectrum of United States politics. I have worked with those people. I am related to those people. You know, I have such a broad range of friends and family in terms of political views, and many of them would hate each other. You know, I'm a link between people that would never tolerate one another. But because I've had to walk in both of those worlds, I just don't see a reason to judge people by their politics and religion at face value. I mean, obviously there's extremes, you know, very violent ideologies or things like that. But for 99% of people, I don't care what their politics and religion are. And I don't care for them to know what mine are. Anyway, so why am I not Ásatru? I could just as easily walk up to anyone on the street in the nearest little town over here and ask them why they're not Hindu, right? Or why they're not worshippers of the Greek gods.
The House of Wolves,
you know, for the most part, I think people's religious beliefs are conditioned by either the culture they grew up in or by a sincere conversion. And I was neither brought up Ásatru nor have I ever had a sincere conversion experience. Plain as that. I have no hostility toward the religion. I have met, especially since making these videos, I've come into contact with a lot of people who do practice Ásatru. And even before that, starting in around 2006, I've been in contact with the Ásatru-félagið. I shouldn't really say the Ásatru-félagið because the id there is the word the in Iceland. Very kind people, very knowledgeable people, and I still have some friendly contacts there. So, you know, it's not out of any dislike of it, and obviously out of any disinterest in the material. One thing that I think is pretty funny is when people say that, well, you know, I'm not going to take information about Norse myth from you because you're not Ásatru, you don't take it seriously. I don't know what is taking it seriously. If getting a PhD in it, which indebts me for life and prevents me from having any sort of normal job, is not taking it seriously. You know, that's truly crazy. You know, I'm happy to read a history of Colorado by somebody who is from Zimbabwe if it's well researched. You know, someone doesn't have to be within your same belief system to tell you about the history of the myths that you celebrate in your religion. Somebody doesn't have to be from your state to tell you about the history of your state. Plain as that. So, when people ask about my opinions about a particular practitioner or a particular practice or a particular group, I rarely really have them because I don't spend a lot of time thinking about Ásatru. I spend time thinking about the medieval religion and of course the preserved myths and the Edda and such, but there's so little about their religion. I have made a video about some of the basic stuff that we do know. Obviously, we know that some sacrifices were practiced. We know about some holidays, but we barely know how this religion was truly practiced because our written sources are written down by Christians. And while Christians were often willing to transmit stories about the Norse gods by writing down poems from the Poetic Edda, or in the case of Snorri, rewriting stories in his own cohesive form, transmitting information about how to worship, how to pray, especially how to make sacrifices, very much against the agenda of any Christian, especially in the Middle Ages, when it's kind of a stretch for Christians to even acknowledge that there's a legitimate interest in something like the religion of their forebears, or a legitimate reason to be interested in the religion of their forebears. And Iceland is one of the rare places where we really see that. So, somebody says, well, this group or this guru or whatever says that we should, engage in this practice. Let me make something up just so that I'm not naming names, because I find it distasteful to try to start like a YouTube feud, right? Let me look around myself and see what I can pull up. I don't know. Here's a stupid one. Such and such a guru on YouTube says that we should always carry a piece of firewood with us. Okay. Such and such guru has decided that based on, I can even make a shall I say, scriptural source for this. In Havin, there's a stanza about knowing how to measure firewood and bark for roofing and things like that. And somehow this guru has decided that this means that you should always have some firewood and maybe some roof bark with you. I don't know. What do I think about this? Well, I think that this is probably ahistorical. I doubt that anybody in pre-Christian Scandinavia was just carrying firewood with them everywhere. They probably spent a lot of time gathering firewood and chopping it, but carrying it, not super likely. So what is my opinion? I don't think there's a historical basis to it, but what the hell am I supposed to say? I don't want to set myself up as a guru myself and say this is how you should practice the religion, because I know about 1% of how you should practice the religion, quote unquote. And I'm sure there was a lot of variation in how it was practiced between Denmark and Sweden and Norway and Iceland, and then even more in how it was practiced by believers in what you could call Alcithru in England, Germany, the Netherlands, etc., before those countries were converted earlier to Christianity. So I can make some kind of very limited calls about whether I think it's plausible that something was practiced or not practiced, but, I just don't have an interest in telling people how to practice their religion. If you feel, and this is not me trying to ridicule anyone, but if you feel, for instance, that carrying firewood with you at all times is an expression of your closeness to your god or gods, who am I to tell you that that's not an expression of your closeness to your god or gods? People practice different things. People feel truth in different things. They feel peace in different things. And I don't care to dissuade them. Like I said, I'm not an evangelist by nature. So these are some of my opinions about Alcithru, and some of my lack of opinions about Alcithru. But I hope this helps to answer some people's questions about me and that religion. For now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm going to wish you all the best.
Watch yourself. Tanix is no common mercenary. He fights to fulfill a contract and hone his combat skills for fun. distortion. Catch just above you.
Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. And in this video, I'd like to talk to you about Norse beliefs in afterlives and afterworlds. People today like to talk about Christian influence on the Norse myths that survive. But I think one of the best examples of Christian influence on our perception of Norse myths today does not have to do with any particular myth that's preserved or any detail about it, but rather in the way that people systematically want the afterlife to work. There's a common, very popular portrayal of two, maybe three alternatives, where the majority of the dead go to hell, those who die in battle go to Valhalla or to Folkvang, and that's pretty cleanly it. But in fact, our Norse sources are much more complex than that, and probably reflect several different layers of belief. Some very early, some very late, and probably reflect generational differences as well as regional differences. Now, one thing I have to point out as we get into this is that two words in particular that I will be using quite a bit in this video are perhaps not the way that you would normally hear them, aside from the fact that I use reconstructed Old Norse pronunciation rather than modern Icelandic pronunciation, which is true of all my videos. I will often be mentioning hell and Valhalla. Now, in many modern websites and books, these are written Hella and Valhalla, but in fact these A's are not part of these words in Old Norse. The A's are added in 18th and 19th century works by writers who want to make these Norse words look more classical. These words are feminine in gender, and in Greek or Latin, many feminine words in an A, as many feminine words do in Old Norse, such as Freya, or words like kona, woman, or saga. But these words don't end with an A in Old Norse, so I'm going to say hell and Valhalla, not Hella, not Valhalla. And the same thing is true of Frigg. She's not Frigga in Old Norse. Alright. Having established that, there is really no single canon set of afterlives, right? There is Snorri's portrayal in his prose Edda, but as much as people talk about, as much as the fans of Norse mythology talk about how much Snorri is influenced by Christianity, they often fail to understand just how much his systematic portrayal of the afterlife is influenced by Christianity. Now, if we really dig deep, it gets a lot more interesting than just hell versus Valhalla. First of all, if we look at the archaeological evidence and at burial practices, there clearly was, at some early day, a strong association of the sea and ships with the afterlife. We see memorials or graves that are shaped like ships, such as Alestenar, Ale stones, in far southern Sweden, which is from about 550 AD. And many others. Sometimes they're not just shaped like ships, sometimes the dead are actually buried in ships, as in the burials from Oseberg and Gokstad in Norway, which you can see at the Viking Ship Museum near Oslo today. And then in the sagas, we read of incidents where someone is buried in a ship. So, for example, in the saga of Gisli Sorsson, I'll give you my translation of a scene from chapter 17. They all went together to Sabo, where the burial mound was being made, and they laid Thorgrimr in the ship. Then they covered him in the mound, in the old way. And when the mound was complete, Gisli went to the river mouth and took up such a big rock it was nearly a hill, and then dropped it into the ship such that nearly every timber cracked and there was a loud creaking noise. And he said, "I don't know how to keep a ship from moving if the weather can move this one." Similarly, in the saga of the people of Laxdal, let me give you a translation of an excerpt from chapter 7 that I've done.
I don't know.
And on the last day of the feast, Unnur was brought to the burial mound that had been made for her, and she was put onto a ship in the mound, and a large amount of money was put into the mound with her. Then all of this was covered up in the mound. Or in the description of Baldur's funeral in the Prose Edda. Again, my translation, from my upcoming translation of the Prose Edda. But But the Aesir took Baldur's body and brought it to the seashore. Baldur's ship was named Hringhorn, the biggest of all ships. The gods wanted to set it forth into the ocean and make Baldur's funeral pyre upon it, but they could not move the ship. They summoned the Jotun woman or witch Hyrroken to move it. Then Baldur's body was put upon the ship, and when his wife Nanna, daughter of Nebr, saw that, she burst from her misery and died. She was placed on the ship, and they set it all on fire. Odin placed the gold ring Draupnir, which creates 8 equally valuable rings every 9th night, into the pyre. Baldur's horse was also led into the flames, with his saddle and all of his tack. So, a strong association with ships, which also, of course, appears in the description of the funeral of the chieftain that even Fadlan describes. I have a whole separate video about that, which I'll link in a card and in the end screen for you to look at if you want a detailed look at that. But this Arabic writer, Ibn Fadlan, Ahmad ibn Fadlan wrote in about a journey that he undertook in 922 when he met some men that he called Rus, which was a common term in Eastern Europe and the Middle East apparently for the Norse, probably somewhat mixed with the Slavic people too, that they buried a chieftain, or didn't bury him, they cremated a chieftain in a ship, just as Baldur is cremated in a ship. And we also see this association with water in the notion of the river of hell, which is called Gjol. In the Prose Edda, when Hermodr, a son of Odin, goes to hell to retrieve Baldur, who has died and gone to hell, it says, again my translation, "It can be told of Hermodr that he rode 9 nights through deep, dark valleys where he could not see, before he came to the river Gjol and rode over the Gjol Bridge, Gjallarbrú, which is roofed with shining gold. Oathgudr is the name of the woman who guards the bridge." And the name of this river of hell being Gjol is apparently quite old, as we have an established kinning for Hel, the ruler of Hel, the female figure Hel, which is Mangjallar, girl of Gjol. Gjol seems to mean simply yell, but it could also be related to some obscure Gothic and Old High German words for a handful or a crescent shape. It's hard to say what exactly to do with this. Incidentally, it's interesting to note that Heimdallar's horn is called Gjallarhorn, and while that is often interpreted to mean something like yeller horn, like yells and yell out loud, it is possible that could be the horn of Gjol, or the horn of the river of hell. And in that connection, I will mention too that Mimir is said to drink from his well with a horn called Gjallarhorn, so perhaps his well is the source of this river, although that's never explicitly said. You know, people always want to take these little details, these little hints, and create elaborate structures out of them and say, this is definitely connected to this is definitely connected to that. But that's all speculation, right? I just want to give you what we do know and not bother with speculating too much. Now, of course, mythical rivers of the dead are not uncommon. In Finnish, we see that there is a river of the dead that Lemminkainen's mother has to fish his body out of in Runo 15 of the Kalevala. Of course, there's the 5 rivers of Hades in Greek tradition, Styx, Lethe, Acheron, Phlegethon, and Casitas and Charon, the ferryman. Yes, I know this might not be exactly how people pronounce all those Greek rivers today. It's one of those things where I know how to pronounce it in Greek. I have a vague idea of how people pronounce it in English today, and I'm trying to do the latter, and I'm probably doing it quote-unquote wrong. It's also said in Völuspá, in stanza 35 of Völuspá in the Codex Regius, that there's a river called Slíðr. Quoting from my translation of the Poetic Edda, a river falls from the east full of daggers and swords through valleys of poison. It is named Slíðr. Here we don't see an explicit association with hell, but it is notable that Saxo Grammaticus, writing in the 1200s in Denmark, states that the dead were said to cross a river of swords to reach the afterworld. So is hell, or the underworld more generally, reached by crossing a river? It seems quite probable that that was an old belief. We also see that in the tradition of the Volsung family, that Odin appears as a ferryman to take the body of Sinfjotli, one of the Volsung heroes, across a body of water in Frå Dau the Sinfjötla, which is in the Portugeta, and then in the part of the Saga of the Volsund that borrows from that. But in the majority of texts preserved from Old Norse, hell is a place that is underground, not unlike Christian hell, but this is one of the few things that those two realms seem to share in common. Hell may not always have been considered underground, or may have been only kind of inconsistently considered underground. There's a curious fact that in For Skirnes, the journey of Skirnes, sometimes called Skirnesmol, the Portugeta, stanza 27 we read, "You will sit forever on an eagle's nest, turned away from the world, looking in at hell. Food will seem as awful to you as the Midgarder serpent, Jormungandr, seems to men." This is interesting because eagle's nests, of course, are not underground, so how would you be looking in at hell from an eagle's nest? It seems to imply that there may be at least other realms, parts of other realms, from which you can look laterally, horizontally into hell. It's not perhaps only reachable by going underground. Now, hell is ruled by a being named Hel. Here's my translation of the passage in the prose Edda, where Snorri talks about her. Odin cast Hel into Niflheimr, and gave her the power in all the 9 realms to portion out room and board for all those who were sent to her, and those are the men who die of sickness or old age. There she owns large homes and farms, Bolstadi. I think it's interesting that this word implies homes and farms together. The fences are magnificently high, and the gates are huge. Her hall is named Storm Increaser, El-Juthnir. Her plate is hunger, Hungr. Her knife is starvation, Sultar. Her slave is walking man, Ganglati. And her slave woman is walking woman, Ganglot. The threshold of her door is falling pit, Fallandaforad. Her bed is deathbed, Kor. And the tapestries hanging above it are glittering misfortune, Blikjandabol. She is half blue and half flesh-colored, and for this reason she is easy to recognize, and also both sad-looking and cruel-looking. Now, there's a lot to piece apart here. Niflheimr is the original watery end of Ginnungagap, the primeval void, from which the rivers flowed that, together with the fires from Muspelsheimer, created the first living being, Ymir. So, Hel may be part of Niflheimr. It is interesting that she is said to portion out room and board, that there's a mention of, like I said, this word that applies with homes and farms. She does have a plate, she has a knife, so there's consumption in hell, right? This is not a place where your bodily needs have ended. You have died, but you still have substantially the same needs, this implies. As we also have implied by the fact that Baldur is welcomed with a feast, which includes great drink when he comes to hell. It is also interesting to note that this description of her half blue and half flesh color is restricted to Snorri, but this has become part of the what I will call the modern canon of Norse mythology, in the form of her being portrayed as being half living and half dead, divided down her nose. It's not entirely clear that's actually what he means here, and the blue part does probably imply that she looks like a corpse, since blue is often what rotten corpses are said to be, especially the undead. So the Afturganga, or zombie-like creature of Norse myth, is usually said to be blue. In fact, they're usually often said to be blår som hell, blue as hell, as in the Afturganga Glomr in Grettis Saga, chapter 32. Han var döður og blár som hell and digger som naut. He was dead and blue as hell, but thick as a steer. Or the Afturganga Thorolfr in Øyrebygge Saga, chapter 63. Var han þó en ófúin og en troslegast í að sjá. Han var blár som hell og digger som naut. He was still unrodden then and very trollish to see. He was blue as hell and thick as a steer. Now, I think that it is probable that in the course of Norse belief over time, hell went from the afterlife for everyone to an afterlife for some. If you read something like the Iliad or parts of the Old Testament, it also appears that there's essentially one afterlife, and that it's a shadow of our world rather than a very different place. And it's interesting to note, too, that there's a real physicality to the way that the afterlife is discussed in Old Norse. There's eating there, there's drinking there, there's farms there apparently, and also no one says in any of these texts so-and-so's soul went to blank afterlife. No one's soul goes to Valhalla, no one's soul goes to hell. It's always just plain and simple, he went to hell, he went to Valhalla. So it's not always clear that there's even the same notion of the separation of the soul and the body that many modern Christians believe in today. It's also interesting that Valhalla probably isn't all that old of an idea. If we look at the poem Atlakvida from the Poetic Edda, probably the oldest poem in the Poetic Edda, probably composed in the 800s based on very solid linguistic evidence. We see in stanza 2, Drukku thar drótt megir en diljendur þógðu, vín í Valhall. The lords of men drink wine there in Valhall, and the deniers were silent. Well, people had haters back then too. But note that these are living men who are just drinking in their hall, and that appears to be Valhall. Now, to me and many others, that is suggested that Valhall at this time did not mean an afterlife. Val is a word for those dead on the battlefield, the quote-unquote slain, and hall means hall. So, of course, it could also be something that someone would simply call their hall of warriors in a sort of tongue-in-cheek way, right? Those of us who are about to die, the hall for those of us. Although it could also be a tongue-in-cheek reference to the afterlife. I don't deny that's possible. But we also see the possibility that Valhall is sort of part of hell. It seems like hell really does mean basically the grave. Once you're in the grave, remember that the body and the soul don't seem to be separated here. Once you're in the grave, you're in hell, whatever other afterlife you might be in. Consider this scene from Gisli's Saga, chapter 14, which has puzzled many people in my unpublished translation. Now Gisli prepared to bury Vestane in a mound in the sandbank that is opposite Sev Pond, below Sable. And when Gisli had reached this place, Thorgrimr arrived with many men for the burial. And when they had given Vestane the proper clothes according to the beliefs of the time, Thorgrimr went to Gisli and said, "It is a custom to tie hell shoes on men who have to walk to Valhall, and I'll do this for Vestane." And when he had done it, he said, "I sure don't know how to tie a pair of hell shoes if these ever come loose." Now, what are hell shoes? Except shoes for hell, but they're being tied on the feet of a man who is going to Valhall. It is a custom to tie hell shoes on men who have to walk to Valhall. That to me implies, again, that hell is not, even if the idea of Valhall is actually older than Atlakvida, and it is a separate afterlife for those who die in battle, that at the same time, the word hell means afterlife above and beyond what particular category of afterlife you may be in. We also see something similar in the poem Hervarakvida in the saga of Hervor and Heidrek, which is appearing soon in a translation by me together with the saga of Rolf Kraki. In this poem, often called the Waking of Angantyr, which I have rendered in my complete English translation in another video that, again, I'll link in a card, we see Hervor speaking to the Aftergange, zombie-like figure of her father. She says, and so he has died in battle, she's standing at the threshold of his grave and talking to him. She said, "You don't speak true. May a god leave you to sit whole in your grave if you don't have Tyrving," a sword she wants from him, with you. "You are reluctant to deliver the inheritance to your only child." Then the grave mound opened, and it was as though fire and flame were all over the grave. Then Angantyr said, "Hell's gate draws up. The grave mounds open. Everything is in flame on the island around. It's an evil sight to look out of the grave. Hurry back, young lady. Go back to your ships." So here, he has died in battle. By implication, he would go to Valhall. But she opens up his grave and finds him there, inhabiting his corpse still. And he says Hell's gate draws up when she opens the grave. Is, in fact, the gate to hell simply the opening of the grave, right? Is the grave itself hell? I think that's quite a likely explanation for at least part of the way that the word hell is used in Old Norse. Consider also the poem Helga kviða hundingsbana 2, the second poem of Helgi, Killer of Hunding, which is in the Poetic Edda. I'll read here from the end of that poem in my translation of the Poetic Edda, which is available in paperback and hardcover from Hackett, and as an audiobook from Blackstone. A burial mound was made for Helgi, and when he came to Valhalla, Odin asked him to help him rule everything. Helgi said, Hunding, you will be a foot washer and fire starter, a dog walker and a horse's groom for every man in Valhalla. And don't forget to feed the pigs before you go to sleep. Hunding is his enemy who he's ordering around here. One of Sigrun's, Sigrun is Helgi's wife, one of Sigrun's serving women walked during the evening near Helgi's burial mound, and she saw Helgi riding toward the mound with a large following of men. The serving woman said, Is this an illusion that I see before me, or has Ragnarok come? I see dead men riding, I see them driving their horses with spurs. Have dead kings been given leave to come home from Valhalla? Helgi said, True, you see us here, driving our horses with spurs. And it is no illusion, nor is it Ragnarok, and neither do we have leave to come home from Valhalla. The serving woman went home and said to Sigrun, Go out from your home, Sigrun, if you want to see your king again. His burial mound is open. Helgi has come back. His wounds are bleeding. That Lord of Men asks that you come and see to his injuries. Sigrun went inside Helgi's burial mound and she said, Now I am as happy to see you, husband, as Odin's eager ravens are when they see fresh, warm corpses, or when, dew covered, they greet the morning. I want to kiss you, my living king, before you take your bloody armor off. There's frost frozen in your hair, Helgi. There's blood all over your body, my king. Your hands are wet with the cold blood of Hogni's kin. My lord, how shall I heal you of these things? Then Helgi criticizes her a little bit for having caused all of this. And we come back to him here, stanza 46. But I can drink happily of Odin's good mead, even if I have lost my lands and my love. No one will sing a sorrowful song for me, even if I have wounds on my chest. For my wife Sigrun is in my mound. The Valkyrie lies by me, though I am dead. Sigrun climbed into his bed in the mound. Sigrun said, Helgi of Ylving kin, I offer you untroubled rest in this place. I want to sleep in your embrace as I would in the arms of a living husband. Helgi said, Now I can foresee everything. You will sleep, lovely lady, daughter of Hogni, tonight and tomorrow morning in the arms of a dead man in his mound. And yet you are alive, noble lady. And still, I must ride the warpath, take my pale horse back to Valhalla. I have to be west of Bifrost before the rooster wakes the men in Odin's hall. Helgi and his men rode their way, and Sigrun and her serving woman returned to her home. The next evening, Sigrun had a serving woman keep watch at Helgi's burial mound. And when Sigrun returned to the mound at sunset, she said, My husband, the son of Sigmund, would have come back from Odin's hall if he could. But I expect there is little chance of his return when eagles sleep in the trees and all the people are dreaming. The serving woman said, Do not be so foolish that you go alone to his burial mound. All the dead are more powerful at night than they are during bright day. Now, keeping in mind that all of these different poems come from different times and places and reflect probably different shades of belief, this is a really interesting, complex picture. He goes to Valhalla, and again, it is him, and it seems like it's his entire body because he gets wounded there. He eats and drinks there, and he can come back and be in his mound with his wife and lie with her as if they're both still alive. And at the end, the serving woman warns Sigrun that she should not go back there, not because he's not in that burial mound, but because he is somehow dangerous to her. And but then at the same time, this sort of contradicts him saying that he's there without leave from Valhalla. But he's moving back and forth between Valhalla and his burial mound, right? There's not one single easy place that the dead Helgi is forever. This is a much more complex picture. And in the next video, which I'm going to do as a sequel rather than as the rest of this one, because I think that these concepts really do deserve somewhat separate treatment, and the ideas in this one deserve some digestion. I'm going to go over Valhalla. My videos are supported by my generous Patreon supporters, many of whom are thanked at the end of this video. I've also translated the Poetic Edda and the Saga of the Volsungs from Old Norse into English. Those are also available as audiobooks. For now, as always, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.
Alright. I've been giving everybody Old Norse lessons. Yeah, it's getting late already. 10 o'clock. I'm listening to something about Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Need help?
Since debuting back in 2007, the Assassin's Creed franchise has changed, well, a lot. No longer the stealth action adventure we once knew. It's now a series of deep and lengthy action RPGs. And sure enough, Assassin's Creed Valhalla looks to deliver another sprawling role-playing experience. But that begs the question, what's new here besides, of course, bloodthirsty Vikings? Actually, a lot. There's an entirely new combat system, a revamped character customization model, a whole new take on the Animus, a new base building mechanic, and heck, Valhalla is even bringing back some of the mechanics that made the series so popular to begin with. Of course, the game doesn't release until November 10th, but before then, I hope you'll join me as I look at everything we know about the world and the gameplay of Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
The high cryptarchs have...
Before we begin, I want to introduce you to the new video game podcast I'm creating with fellow YouTuber, JV. It's called Preloaded, and just like the content on this channel, Preloaded is dedicated to previewing all of the biggest and most exciting upcoming video games. We cover news, gameplay details, and hands-on impressions. And best of all, it's free. You can get to the video version of Preloaded right now over on JV's YouTube channel, or you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. I've left the links in the description, but for now, let's dig in to Assassin's Creed Valhalla.
Valhalla.
A glorious hunt. Almost ashamed to see it end.
Assassin's Creed Valhalla begins in the year 873, and you play as Eivor, the leader of a Viking clan preparing to leave the frigid Scandinavian north and settle the more fertile and temperate kingdoms of England. While the vast majority of the game will take place in England, terms of range, Valhalla is probably a bit larger than Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But this contradicts a prior statement from one of Ubisoft's heads of communications, Malek Tafaha, who said in a tweet that Valhalla, quote, won't be the longest or biggest game in the series. However, that tweet was deleted, and even if Valhalla is smaller than Odyssey, I'd expect at least 80 hours of gameplay, but that's if you want to explore everything. So what will you explore? Well, Norway and those few surprise areas haven't been shown, but we do know that England will be split into 4 kingdoms. Wessex in the south, Mercia to the west, Northumbria up north, and East Anglia, which we got to see in the demo and has drawn comparisons, at least aesthetically, to The Witcher 3. As I'll get to later, each of these kingdoms will play into how Valhalla's narrative unfolds as you form alliances, but they'll also come into play as you meet the game's villains. For example, one antagonist, King Alfred, rules over the kingdom of Wessex. And while I'm not sure it will play as much into the geography, we also know that both the Assassins and Templars will be a part of this world. As put by Ashraf Ismail, who formerly served as creative director on Valhalla, quote, yes, we run across Assassins and Templars, or Hidden Ones and Order of Ancients, in this time period. He also went on to explain that Eivor will actually work together with the Assassins at some point. Getting back to the map, we've seen mostly countryside locations, but you'll also get to explore at least 3 main cities: London, Winchester, and Jorvik, known today as York. As you'd expect, there will also be a slew of towns and smaller settlements. And speaking of settlements, one thing that's entirely new in Assassin's Creed Valhalla is that you'll be building your very own Viking settlement from the ground up. In other words, base building is now a core gameplay mechanic. Throughout your playthrough, you'll gather resources and raw materials that you can use to expand your base. As put by Ismail, quote, a lot of what you're doing in the game world is at the end of the day gonna feed into the settlement, end quote. Now, I haven't been able to determine whether you can choose where on the map to settle or whether the game decides for you, but we do know that your camp must at least be located on a river, as your facilities will include a shipyard for customizing your longship. You'll also gain access to a range of building types, and according to Ismail, quote, each building comes with its own gameplay purpose. One that we know of is your barracks, which will allow you to, quote, get better troops, and as your settlement expands, you'll also gain access to, quote, useful services, better tools, and new settlers. These will include your blacksmith, who I presume will upgrade your weapons, as well as a tattoo parlor and a barber shop, both of which allow you to modify Eivor's appearance. But your settlement is more than just a place to receive upgrades. According to Valhalla's narrative director, Darby McDevitt, it'll also be integral to Valhalla's story progression. Quote, we want you to have quests with people in the settlement. You solve problems in the settlement. New settlers come in, new people to interact with, small little quests and moments, and lots of little surprises, end quote. Your settlement is also where you'll access your Alliance map, which it seems will help you decide where to go next, both geographically and narratively. Main quest lines have been called by the developers as, quote, territory arcs, and it sounds like these will involve forging alliances within the game's various kingdoms. We saw one of these take shape in the demo as Eivor earned the trust of a king named Oswald. Deciding which territory arcs to take on and which alliances to forge appears to happen at your alliance map, which shows not just what rewards might await in certain territories, but also whether you're appropriately leveled to enter said region. So as a side note, yes, level gating does appear to guide your quest, at least to an extent. Once you decide where to go next, the act of exploring in Valhalla will feel a lot different, but not everything is changing. You still have a horse to ride around on, though it now has a stamina meter and it can now swim. Also, fast travel looks to work in more or less the same way. That is, you can jump to and from synchronization points. But things get a lot different once you hop into your longship. Carving a sort of medieval highway system throughout England are inland rivers and waterways that you can use to quickly sail from place to place. In that this will be your fastest method of travel outside of fast travel, you'll be sailing a lot in Valhalla. Plus, your longship comes with a crew of Viking warriors who you yourself recruit, and who are fully customizable. And traveling with a boat full of badasses enables you to quickly launch full-scale raids. I'll expand on raids later, but as put by Le Verrier, quote, any military location you encounter on the rivers of England is fully raidable, end quote. And if you're on the way to a raid and you just want to enjoy Viking melody or tell a story to pass the time. But much of your time, of course, will be spent on foot, and for the most part, hoofing it in Valhalla looks to work pretty much the same as it did in Odyssey. It looks like you can still climb anything, and parkour remains a, quote, core element of the game. But one element that's become more challenging is finding, then acquiring all the loot hidden throughout the world. That's because the game features more environmental puzzles, even if they are rather simple. Here we see Eivor firing an arrow through the rear window of a dwelling to break the lock off the front door from the inside. Another instance I saw had Eivor blowing up an explosive barrel to break through a cracked wall, while another required exploring a dried-up well to locate the key to a nearby cottage. But some puzzles were more elaborate. In what must have been one of the demo's more lengthy side quests, Eivor had to track down 3 swords that fit into slots on a statue that itself was hidden underground. According to Valhalla's quest director, Philip Bergeron, the team thought much about how to work puzzles into this world. Quote, "We wanted the exploration to make you feel smarter, so we played a lot with puzzle solving.
Thank you,
making
Guardian.
sure that
The
every
Kel
house you
is in
find
chains,
sort of appeals
and I
to you,
can't wait
like
to
it
get back
draws
in
your
the field.
attention. And then when you want to come and explore, it's not given to you. You still have to work for it a little bit." End quote. One final bit on exploration that I want to touch on is that, just like in Assassin's Creed Origins and Odyssey, which both let you take control of your pet eagle, Valhalla lets you take to the skies as a raven named Sinan. As Sinan, you can scout enemy encampments and mark the location of resources, but you can now also see waypoints in the distance far more clearly as you fly around in real time. This gives you a much better idea of how far you have to travel. Also, unlike Odyssey, it doesn't sound like you'll be able to use Sinan to mark every enemy in an encampment. That said, you can place an actual waypoint on an enemy, allowing you to easily follow, say, one high-value target over long periods of time. And speaking of waypoints, you might have noticed that most of them are either blue or yellow. And that plays into the new ways Assassin's Creed Valhalla is handling not just waypoints, but also quests. Let's take a look.
Filthy fallen.
Warlock, right? No, wait, don't tell me. Hunter? Well, why not?
Quests in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, whether part of the main story or optional side missions, are working a bit differently than in prior games. As for main quests, these will span vast, epic, and branching storylines that the developers have called territory arcs, which will see Eivor forming alliances throughout the game's various regions. Again, we got to see this in the demo as players spent several hours working to build a relationship with King Oswald of East Anglia. In true RPG fashion, these quests will provide opportunities to make choices that hopefully have meaningful impacts on the story. In fact, McDevitt has confirmed that each of these arcs will feature, quote, at least one major choice. But I'm skeptical as to how consequential these choices might actually be. I am going to get into some very minor story spoilers here, but nothing we didn't see in the demo. Skip ahead to the time code I've marked at the bottom of your screen if you want to stay 100% spoiler-free. Okay, what we saw in the demo was that at some point, Eivor must rescue Oswald from a rival Viking leader named Ruin. Once you defeat Ruin, you have the choice to either kill him or spare his life. Spare him and he'll return later in that same mission to kill Oswald. Now, if Oswald were to die, that would be a major consequence. But when Ruin challenges Oswald, you have another choice. You can either let Oswald fight for himself, or you can fight in his place. Choose the latter, and you'll eventually kill Ruin once and for all. But from what I found, even if you let Oswald fight for himself, he still survives. Or as Bergeron put it, quote, ultimately, in all scenarios, you still have an alliance with Oswald. That means the stakes are never quite as high as the game would lead you to believe. Short choices will have an impact on shorter storylines, but we have yet to see